friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. This is the start of a reading vlog for Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare, her very first adult fantasy novel that is not in the Shadowhunter world. So I'm doing this a little differently than usual, that I'm filming the intro at the end of the video. So I just finished the book and wrapped up my thoughts, but I wanted the beginning of this video to include a little bit of a spoiler-free introduction, overview, and review of the book before I get into all of my spoilery thoughts. The majority of this video is going to be full spoilers. It's going to include my thoughts, my analysis, but also just kind of recapping some of the major events of things that are taking place as I'm reading the book. So just as a heads up, if this is a book you haven't yet read and you intend to read it, you may want to just watch the spoiler-free section and then skip the rest of the video. But for people who want full spoilers, they are there for you. So a little bit about my history with Cassandra Clare. I started reading her books many years ago in my early 20s, and I have enjoyed them. I know the criticisms people have of her and of her books. I think there are valid criticisms to make. I think there are things she's really improved in her writing over the years, and you know, things where she isn't always edited as much as she should be in the Shadowhunter books, but I have read the majority of the things that she has put out, and I was really curious to see how Swordcatcher was going to go. Now, this is a book she's been talking about for years. I've gone to book events with her, and I've heard her discuss Swordcatcher, and so the fact that we're finally getting it, I was like, okay, I definitely want to give this a try and see how it is. Is it significantly different from what we've gotten from her in the past? Does it feel like an adult fantasy novel? Is it worth reading for people who are maybe not so into the Shadowhunter universe? And having just finished reading it, overall, it was a pretty pleasant surprise, and I liked the book quite a lot, with an asterisk that the prologue and really about the first 30% of the book does have a good bit of like kind of info dumpy world building stuff woven in, or like awkward conversations between characters that are designed to like drop some information, and sometimes going off on these world building descriptions that are not at all directly related to what we're learning in the plot. And is this the time that we need to be learning this information? I don't know. Am I remembering all of it? Probably not. So I would say that the first part of the book is a little bit clunky from that perspective, but once we really get into the flow of the story, I found it really engaging and really interesting. I thought the pacing moved along really nicely. The character work is pretty good, and there are lots of twists and turns. One thing that's interesting is that this book was blurbed by George R.R. Martin, and they're doing an event together. And when I first saw that, I was like, what? George R.R. Martin is blurbing a Cassandra Clare book? But now having read it, honestly, I can kind of see why. It is a book that is deeply embedded in political machinations at multiple levels of society. There's betrayal, there are secrets, there are lots of things being hidden, a lot of morally gray choices and characters, and questions that I even still have coming out of book one. We have some questions that get answered, and a big cliffhanger ending that leaves you wanting book two and wanting to know more about the world, more about what's gonna happen next. I do really like the characters. I think they're interesting. We have two perspective characters. One of them is Kel, who is the eponymous sword catcher, who is an orphan who is plucked from obscurity to basically be the body double and bodyguard of the prince. And so he's one of our perspective characters. And then the other one is a young woman named Lynn, who is a healer. She's a physician, and she is part of the Ashkari, which are a people group who have a little bit of magic and are kind of ostracized from society. I talk about this later in the video, but I think it eventually becomes clear that they are very much coded as Jewish, which, doing a little bit of research, is drawing on Cassandra Clare's own family history, and I think that the way that that's done is kind of interesting. So that's an overview of what the book is. I ended up really liking it. I gave it 4.5 stars because I had such a good time reading it. It's not something that's gonna get above that just because that first 30% really does have some clunky bits in terms of the way that it's doing some of the world building and introducing a lot of the concepts and the people and places, and that could have been pared down a little bit or polished a little bit more. But in general, I think it's a pretty good book. And while the characters still aren't super old, they're, I would say, in their early 20s, I think we're starting to see more and more side characters who are older, and I anticipate that in book 2 we might see some growth in terms of the ages of the characters and their place in life and what's going on with them. It does feel much more like an adult fantasy novel than I was expecting. I've read quite a few books from YA authors who've tried to cross over into adult, some more successfully than others, and I would say that this is one of the more successful versions that I've seen. Now, there are some things I laugh at through the course of the video in terms of like, oh, hey, you know how we know it's adult? Because they're going to a brothel. Like, I don't know. It's not super explicit for the most part about things either, but there is something about it in terms of the themes that it's exploring and the scope of the story that feels much more in line with adult fantasy than YA fantasy. Although this certainly could be a crossover. I think that some of her readers of YA could pick this up and read it as well, but I also think that there are a lot of people who might not be fans of the Shadowhunters series who could really enjoy Swordcatcher. So you might be wondering, is there romance? Are there love triangles? Is there drama? Of course, there is some of it, but I would say that that is not nearly as heavily centered as the political stuff. And to me, that is appropriate, again, for adult fantasy. So it's there, it's juicy, it's interesting, but it's not the main point of the story. So Swordcatcher for me was a win. I liked it. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I think there's a lot to like here, and I'm really interested to see when other reviews start pouring in. I will say this, I think there are people who are going to pick it up and are going to nitpick the hell out of it, especially in that first 30%, because listen, like, there are things you could nitpick. Like, it is clunky, but it improves, and I overall had a good time. Now back to earlier Bethany, who does not know any of that yet and has just started to read the book. If you want to hear my full spoilery thoughts as I am reading along, keep watching. Right, I have acquired the audiobook of Swordcatcher and started reading it, and I wanted to give you some of my first impressions and first thoughts. So far, I've just read the prologue, chapter 1, and about the first half of chapter 2. So the prologue is set a number of years before the actual beginning of the book, and this is following one of our main characters, Kel, who had been raised in an orphanage and then is sort of plucked out of that orphanage to perform as sword catcher to the prince of the city-state, Castellan, I think is what it's called, that they live in. Now, the reason he was chosen is because he looks somewhat similar to the prince, is the same age and about the same build, and then the idea is that some low-key magic will be used to make people think that they're really seeing the prince when it's him. This is basically so the prince has a body double, hence the sword catcher. He's there to help save the life of the prince or to step in situations where the prince is sick but needs to be seen, things like that. So the prologue is him kind of being brought in for a trial run where he is given this magical amulet. He's told to go to this dinner, not say too much, and they're kind of testing to see, is he somebody who would be a good long-term sword catcher for Prince Connor. Connor is the prince. He does surprisingly well. Part of this is because he's gotten some decent education at the orphanage that he lives at, and so he's into books and reading and is clever and knows a little bit about politics, even if he's kind of rough around the edges. And, you know, I think, like, it does a decent job of setting up this idea that he would know somewhat how to behave because of the specific orphanage that they took him from. It kind of works. Then afterwards, he meets with Connor, the prince, who says, I don't want to force you into this, but here's the opportunity. If you do this, then when I become king, you get to become a noble and you can retire and have wealth and have this extraordinary life. And Kel accepts. They're both still pretty young boys at this stage, but chapter 1, we jump years later to where Connor is now getting pressured to get married. It is time. and we see him and Kel interacting now that they've known each other for so many years and kind of grown up side by side. In terms of the writing, I would say that the prologue is definitely pretty jam-packed with world-building details, to a point where there are some parts that feel a bit forced, a bit info dumpy. I mean, and to be fair, it's not that different from some similar fantasy books that I've read that also are wanting to give you a lot of information very quickly. It does feel a little bit excessive because it's the combination of a lot of description of the places we're in, the food that's being eaten, the things that are happening, combined with details that are supposed to give you some sense of what is the political structure of the system and who are some of the key players. Not that we're going to remember the names of a lot of these key players anyway. And so there are some passages that feel a little bit awkward and a little bit forced into the structure of like, hey, I'm going to have these characters have this weird conversation so that I can like spit some information at you. You know, again, like she's not the only person to do something like this. If I'm interested enough in the rest of the book, it's not a huge deal, but I know that that is something that would irritate some people. So the prologue is quite a long one. It's a little bit over an hour on the audiobook. I don't know what the page count is. And honestly, I really want to get the physical book so that I can read along with the audio. I was looking and my pre-order isn't supposed to arrive until like Monday, which is quite a while from now, and I will be done with the audiobook before then. So I honestly might just like hop over to my local Barnes & Noble and pick up a copy there and then return the one that comes in the mail because, you know, I want it sooner so that I can have the physical copy to read along with. So chapter 1 has the time jump. I really like the relationship that we're seeing between Connor and Kel. They've got some fun banter and there's some teasing about the women that Connor is being asked to consider as wife. Kel gives a speech on Connor's behalf. You know, there's not really a lot happening in chapter 1 other than just kind of cementing this time jump, showing us what their relationship with each other is like now. Chapter 2, we're being introduced to a new perspective character. I forget her name, but I'm sure I'll know it later and I'll put it here. I am only halfway into chapter 2. I haven't finished it yet. I had to make this clip before I have to run and pick up my kids from school. But this second perspective is a young woman who is part of, I forget what they're called. I just started the book, but there's a term that they use for people who have magic, and they are somewhat an oppressed group in society because they used to be very powerful. Now they're not all that powerful anymore, but they have to wear certain clothes that show people that's what they are. They aren't allowed access to certain forms of knowledge. And so this girl has become a healer, but she isn't allowed to actually study medicine formally and isn't allowed access to the scrolls that would help her learn how to treat more people's symptoms just because of her heritage. So that's as far as I've gotten so far. I am interested. I feel like this has potential. I'm curious to see where it's gonna go. I do feel like it's maybe a little bit overwritten, a little bit on the info dumpy side in terms of all the details that we're being given in world building that aren't really necessary to know at a specific point in time. But I can't say that I'm shocked that that's what we're getting from Cassandra Clare, because I feel like that's also something I've gotten from her in some of her other books as well. So far I'm tentatively optimistic. I'm curious to see where it's gonna go. I am also interested to see what she does with race stuff, because there is this oppressed magic using group, but there are also people with different skin tones. So the queen has dark brown skin, and the reason that Kel is picked as the body double for Connor is that they both are apparently biracial and have like olive colored skin or light brown skin, something like that. The queen is from another country. It was a political arranged marriage, so it does seem that like the majority of people that live in the city-state are probably white other than immigrants. So yeah, I don't know. That's what we have so far. I will check back in once I've made a little more significant progress, but I wanted to give my first impressions. Okay, I don't have that much of an update, but I did make it through the first 3 chapters. By the way, the chapters are super long. They're all like an hour long. I don't know what that means in pages, but it's a lot. So I can tell you the way that we know for sure that this is an adult book and not a YA book is that the characters go to a brothel and hang out there and have a favorite brothel. So this is how we know it's adult, because they're going to brothels. Is there any detailed description of what they're doing in the brothels? No, but I think the fact that they're spending a lot of time there seems to be like, hey, this is for adults. I still think that a lot of it is overwritten. We still get these, like, a lot of very info-dumpy sentences where I'm like, okay, we're just going off on a tangent and giving us a lot of information, some of which isn't really super relevant. I think, some of this may be, like, personal preference. I feel like unless I just think the writing is gorgeous, I have less patience these days for books that do this kind of thing, that do a lot of like excessive description of things with world building that aren't really relevant to what's going on. I don't know. There are authors who can do it and do it well. This isn't my favorite version of it, but I am still interested in the story. So, like, as much as I'm saying that the writing isn't amazing, it's, like, I'm still kind of interested because Kel got kidnapped and I don't know where Colin is, so that's something. And yeah, I don't know. So we'll see how this goes. I will read more and check back in. Also, New York Comic Con is this week, and I might be having lunch with Jess Owens tomorrow, so I'll take you guys along with me if I get to see her, because she's in town for New York Comic Con. I'm going to Comic Con, and tomorrow's the last day before it starts, so we're gonna probably meet up for lunch. Good morning. I made it through the first 7 chapters, which is a little more than a third of the audiobook. I am just making my breakfast this morning, and I would say I'm mostly enjoying it. It's interesting. So last thing I think I said on here was Kel had been kidnapped. It didn't last very long, but he was kidnapped by the Rag Picker King, who is sort of the lord of the underworld in the city, who wants somebody in the castle to spy on people. And so that's created some interesting intrigue, and Kel originally says no, but he clearly has some conflicted feelings about the family that he's serving, because he's in a dangerous position. And as much as he says he trusts Connor, as it turns out, Connor has a big secret. He is in debt to somebody in the underworld, which I don't know why. Why would a prince who in theory should have access to money be in debt? Also, it's a little unclear to me how he has so many secrets from the person who's supposed to be with him pretty much 24/7. So we'll see if that gets explained or if that's a plot hole. I don't know. I'm getting a little bit more interested in the plot line of Lynn. Lynn is the woman who is the physician. As it turns out, she is the granddaughter of the sort of court magician who gave Kel the amulet to make him look like Connor. And so when Kel is injured by people who think he's the prince, who are trying to shake him down for the money that's owed, she's brought in to help heal him. And he like almost dies and she heals him, but she figures out who he is and what he is. So like the fact that he's the sword catcher is supposed to be this tightly held secret, but there's a lot of people who know. The Rag Picker King knows. Now she knows. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. We also get these sort of brief things at the beginning of every chapter that are giving us some insight into the history of the world. That used to be a lot of people had magic, and then these sort of sorcerer kings took power and didn't want anybody else having a lot of power. And now there just isn't a lot of power in the world. There's just the people who are like Lynn and the people that she's with who have a very small shadow of the power that they once had, but are still kind of ostracized for it. And yet there is this stone, this mysterious stone that was given to her by this old man that she used to take care of, who was then killed mysteriously, but got the stone to her before he died. And there's something weirdly magical about it. So, questions. I think the writing improves the further in you get. You get fewer of these kind of info dumpy chunks where it's like telling you way too much information and going off on these tangents. This is part of why I want a physical copy though, is because then I could show you what I'm talking about and like read a couple of these passages. So if I'm able to pick one up today, maybe I'll read a couple of examples of the sort of thing I mean. But in the meantime, I'm going to have some breakfast. I'm going to keep listening to the audiobook. New York Comic Con starts tomorrow, and I would love to be able to finish this today so that I don't have to worry about it heading into Comic Con, which I think is doable. We'll see. Okay, just briefly, I just literally sat down and started the audiobook again, but in this it's mentioning a sorcerer king who had source stones that could make him more powerful, and he's falls in love with a beautiful woman and is going to show her the source stones. And I'm wondering, is the rock a source stone? It seems like it's probably a source stone. Not that we know much about what they do yet, but I'm guessing that's what it is. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention. So Lynn's people have this festival that is celebrating this prophesied return of their goddess who will bring magic back, and that she'll return in the form of a girl. And that festival is coming up. Lynn's cousin or sister or somebody, I'm not super clear on their relationship. Maybe it's just her friend who is sickly, who she's trying to take care of, like has gotten her a dress to go to the festival and wants her to go when she just wants to spend all her time trying to find a cure. But I think she's going to go to the festival. So my question is also, is Lynn going to be the prophesied return of the goddess in girl form in order to bring magic back to her people? Maybe. We'll see. I am drinking my coffee and catching up on a few things before I exercise and shower and get ready for the day. But I wanted to do a little update. The Ragpicker King is a really interesting figure in this because he's kind of shadowy. We don't know a lot about him, but there are mysterious objects in his house that we're wondering why he has them. No one knows much about him. He looks like he's pretty young, but he's been around forever. Is it the same man? Is it different people? Who knows? He summoned Lynn to his house after he found out that she had healed Kel and tells her that, in fact, the stone is a source stone, which she didn't know. And he mentions that it's considered forbidden magic for her people because it was created by the Sorcerer King. So that's interesting. And he wants her to work for him now and try to figure out how to bring magic back to the world for healing purposes and stuff like that. And of course, she's interested. Kel and Colin's relationship is getting more complicated because Colin is still hiding something from Kel even after he confronted him about the money he owes. The reason is that some kind of a guy bought up all his debts from different merchants around the city, and it adds up to a really large amount, and is threatening to publicly take him before the council as to kind of make a mockery of the family and have it repaid. So he says he thinks he can get the money together. We don't know how. It's interesting. I'm enjoying it. There's a lot of sort of twisty political elements. I am curious to know a little bit more about the wider world. I feel like we have these vague mentions of other city-states and other peoples, but we don't really know much about them or how they actually interact with Castellan, the city that we're in. But yeah, I'm liking it. I think despite a rough start and despite sometimes, especially early on in the book, a tendency to info dump and overwrite things, it's interesting. Is this going to be my new favorite book? Probably not, but I'm having a reasonably good time with it. So I will keep reading. Okay, I'm just about to go exercise and I'm at the halfway point in the book. And things are really getting interesting because we had Kel going to talk to the Ragpicker King in person to ask him a question because he's trying to figure out what's going on, who's threatening the prince, and why. And we learned some really interesting information. One is that the Ragpicker King is an inherited role, so it's not that he's magically just lived a long time, but also that there is a contract that has existed forever, basically, between the first Ragpicker King and the first King on the Hill that basically protects the Ragpicker King in exchange for him making sure that the wrong kinds of crime don't crop up in the city. But what we found out is that all of that is in jeopardy because at some point in the recent past, the king had sent a message. The King on the Hill had sent a message to the Ragpicker King, so Colin's dad, saying he and his son were in danger. The Ragpicker King sent a response, but the soldier who was the messenger was found murdered. And so he thinks that probably the king thinks he never responded. And that's part of why he's trying to recruit Kell to help him out, because something different is happening, something that is threatening the monarchy, threatening the system of things. And even the fact that this other kind of underworld player sent his goons to threaten the prince for all of that money means that something's up, right? So the thing about the king is that he's maybe kind of losing his mind, and they're keeping him in the background, but he's not really able to do work. He's just interested in studying the stars. Something's weird is going on with him. And I don't know what the time period is between when he sent this note saying that he and his son were in danger and when the soldier was killed. So this is kind of what we've learned. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I just think is interesting, and she's a side character who I really like, and I actually think it would be really cool if in future books we got a perspective from her, is Antonetta. So she's a girl that Kell meets in the prologue at the very first dinner, right, where he's auditioning sort of to be the sword catcher. And Antonetta is this recurring character who maybe I mentioned her earlier. I'm not sure, but she's this recurring character who early in her life played with the princes, rough and tumble, until they sort of decided, hey, like, she's getting too old for this. We're going to take her away, get her through finishing school or whatever, and have her debut as a lady, right? And Kell kind of has a thing for her, always has, but her mom warned him off her that, like, she's meant for greater things. I don't 100% understand it because everyone thinks he's the king's cousin, but I guess the mom doesn't want them together. Anyway, but she keeps showing up. And the thing that's so fascinating is that while Kell was originally really put off by all of her ladylike airs and the way that she handles herself and acting dumber than he knows she is, he's starting to realize the power that it holds and the way that she's able to use acting like a silly, girl who doesn't know anything to diffuse situations and to impact the direction that things go, and is realizing, okay, maybe there's a reason behind what she's doing. So I just think that's interesting because it's a different form of power that we don't always see, but I think is accurate. Anyway, I'm really enjoying it at this point, if you couldn't tell, and I'm very curious to see what's going to happen. So we're about halfway through. Things are really picking up. I expect there's going to be some big reveals and big things going on in the next little bit. So I'm going to go exercise and listen to some more of the audiobook, and we'll see what happens. And I am meeting Jess Owens for lunch later, so that'll be fun. Okay, I was just about to start, and then I realized there was one other thing I wanted to mention that I didn't talk about, and that is the interaction between Colin and Lynn, which is pretty entertaining and interesting. She has no patience for him, and he's pretty entitled and kind of an ass, but she just wants nothing to do with him and kind of doesn't like him, and he doesn't know what to do about that. He gets pissed off and is like, you're never allowed back in the palace. She sneaks in anyway to check on her patient. He gets angry at her again. But also there's this kind of tension where I wouldn't be shocked if it kind of goes in a romantic direction in the future, because she thinks he's attractive, but she dislikes him, which is understandable. Like, nobody ever tells him no, and he needs to probably be told no from time to time. Also, there is this really weird interaction that happened between the Queen and Kell, where she basically tells him that the prince can't survive without him. And I don't know, it just reads as if there's more to the sword catcher role than we know. I'm wondering if maybe there's some kind of a magical connection, because we also know he's got all these scars all over his body from times that he's been injured in his role as sword catcher over the years, and he seems to be healing unusually fast. So is it the healing stone that Lynn had on her when she healed him, or is there some kind of a magical tie where he gets some of the, between him and Connor, because of the amulet, where maybe he gets some of the energy from Connor or something so that he can heal faster? I don't know. It's weird. But then she says the reason he, doesn't need the sword catcher anymore when he becomes king is that a god takes over the protection. I have questions. It's very interesting. So there's a lot of interesting things going on, a lot of questions that are unanswered, and I'm pretty into it at this point. Oh, and I keep like realizing that I have thoughts that I wanted to share, and then I'm like, oh wait, and this other thing. The other thing is that it is a somewhat queer norm society. So Kel is bi, and I mean, that's not surprising. I feel like Cassandra Clare often has some queer characters in her books. So I don't really know about anybody else, but we know for sure that Kel is canonically bisexual. And that even though it's extremely rare, there has been a historical case of a queen having a queen consort. So, you know, like, even though it's not super common, there are like allowances made for that. So, yeah. All right, finished. I need to go shower and get myself together in time for lunch with Jess. But things are continuing to get pretty interesting. We're getting more small twists and added intrigue to the dynamics between different characters, their history, some of the political issues. One thing that is interesting is Kel goes to see the king, and the king is like, I never heard back from the rag picker. Maybe it was wrong. The stars said we would never meet, so I guess it was right. And Kel tries to get him to explain things, and the king says something about debt. Kel is like, oh, does he know that Connor is in all of this debt? But when he says like, oh, it's only 10,000 crowns, the king is like, no, a debt of flesh and blood. And I'm like, okay, what? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the debt is. But then the sort of astronomer or astrologer, I guess, assistant to the king comes in and kicks Kel out and is kind of threatening him and then trying to get the king to take medicines. So it seems to be implying that maybe he is controlling the king's health and mental health in a negative way and maybe has his own thing going on. Then Kel is trying to get a meeting with the leader of the criminal organization that is targeting Connor, and meets with his right-hand man and poisons himself and the other guy to get him to agree to make a meeting, which is like pretty hardcore. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. And then we learn that the poisoner who works for the rag picker king and is the brother of the madam of the brothel that they're into, there's some whole drama between them and a nobleman who was supposedly exiled from the city because of some stuff that he did that was really messed up. So there's a lot of intricate things happening, interwoven narratives, politics and power and people who want revenge. And it's very enjoyable. So I would say, you know, the first maybe third of the book is really where you're getting the info dumpy world building, the overwriting mixed in with some, you know, interesting plot stuff. I was still engaged, but we were getting more of that. But at this point, it's not that. Things are really moving along at a fast clip. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen next. Showered, dressed, and off to lunch with Jess. Hey, it's Jess.
Fancy meeting you here.
So strange. Okay, here's where we're going. Hold on. Okay, this is like one of my favorite places. I gave Jess a bunch of suggestions. And this is what we're going with. It is really good. Okay, it is 9 o'clock. Am I actually gonna be able to finish this tonight? I don't know. Maybe it's gonna be cutting it close, I feel like. But I have made quite a bit more progress and I wanted to do a check-in now that my kids are in bed. Where to even start? I mean, I guess I will say that I have been very much enthralled with the story and invested in what's happening with the characters. Kel manages to get a meeting with the guy that Colin owes money to, but it doesn't end up really mattering all that much anyway because he finds out that Colin had just paid him in a foreign currency. And then we find out that the way Colin was able to pay off his debt was by agreeing to a betrothal without telling anybody. So the bride price was the 10,000 crowns or whatever to pay off his debt. What's wild though is his dad is pissed because his dad comes out and is sort of like, oh, the stars are saying you're gonna marry, I think, Antonetta. It's a little unclear from the way it's described, but like I think it's Antonetta's mom that was doing it. It could have been another noble, but yeah, I think she had like schemed to get the astrologer to tell the king the stars said a certain thing about a betrothal to get him to betroth his son to the daughter of the person he worked for. Basically, it's kind of like what the whole setup was. So the king is pissed when he finds out that the betrothal he's now saying that his son is going to be pushed into all of a sudden isn't going to work out because Colin has already agreed to this betrothal anyway. And then the king has Colin whipped until he passes out, which is a lot. So it's like there is something up with the king. He is not fully in his right mind, and there's this whole big thing about the potential for scarring because it's considered an embarrassment, and there would be questions that would have to be answered if the prince has scars. And so because they don't want anyone to know that the king had the prince whipped, they bring Lynn in again to heal him, which she does using the magic stone. One thing that I didn't love is she has this moment of thinking about how like the scars were gonna like destroy his beauty or something like that, which it feels kind of ableist, so not the best way of handling it, but in fact she is able to heal it so that there are no scars. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. There is a really unhealthy, abusive dynamic in the royal family between all of these characters. And as it turns out, for whatever reason, it's unclear to me why, to be honest, but for some reason, the people that he did make the deal with to get engaged to the daughter are angry at him. I don't know why they're angry at him, but they're angry at him. And instead of sending the daughter his age, who he thought he was getting engaged to, they send their like 12-year-old younger daughter, and they can get away with it because of contractual shenanigans. So some things happen. There's kind of an intense moment between Connor and Lynn. He ends up kissing her. She's kind of into it, but also he hates her because she doesn't need anything from him, which is so interesting. I'm not surprised. Like, we could see the tension. I was not shocked that there was this moment between the two of them. And now he's engaged to a 12-year-old. So like, he's like, well, I guess I've got 10 years before I have an actual marriage. You know, political marriages, fun times. And then Kel has a moment with Antonetta, and he even, okay, so like, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the whole thing was there's stuff about like betrayal, who's gonna betray who and when, and that's interesting because so part of this is Kel is being pressured to betray Antonetta, who he really values, because when he did have that meeting to go and talk to the underworld crime lord, he said, I'll tell you who my patron was, who my sponsor was, who gave me all this money to try to mess with the royal family, if you bring me the golden locket that Antonetta wears, because something inside of it is a secret, right? And so he tells him that, and Kel's like, no, I wouldn't betray her, but then like has mixed feelings about it. And then later on, he dresses up in disguise secretly as Colin, which is the first time he's ever dressed as Colin without Colin knowing he's doing it, to go visit the astrologer in prison. And the astrologer tells him, because he thinks he's Colin, right? He thinks he's the prince, that he should be wary of his sword catcher because the stars say that one day he'll have something the sword catcher wants enough that he'll hate him and he'll want him dead or something like that. And so, you know, who knows if this is real or not, but Kel is questioning his own loyalty to Colin. What does this mean for the future? And so he's at a party, he has this moment with Antonetta, and he does take her locket, her golden locket that she wears all the time. And he opens it, and initially it looks like there's nothing inside of it, but he's like, this feels weird, there must be a false bottom, and there is, and inside is this like brass or iron, I think brass ring that he had given her when they were kids. So she's carrying that around. So he like feels bad, and he closes it back up and gives it to her as if she just like dropped it. But things are being set in motion, and so I'm wondering, like, who is pulling the strings here, right? Like, who is the puppet master? And was the thing of trying to get Kel to betray Antonetta by getting the locket actually about getting the locket, or was it actually about getting him to find out that she was still maybe carrying feelings for him, because they're trying to mess with the integrity of the relationship between Kel and Colin? I don't know. Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of drama. There's some love triangle things happening. There's betrayal, and I'm really into it. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Lynn also finds out that her grandfather wants to maybe make her his successor, because what we do find out is that for like historical reasons, there has always been an Ashkari, that's what they're called, they're magical people group, the Ashkari, that there's always been an Ashkari counselor to the king, and that role is important because it humanizes their people to royalty. And so he's getting old, he wants to maybe train Lynn up to be his successor, and he's like, well, come with me to this party so you can see what it's like and give me your answer. And she's like, you know, this is when the whole thing with Colin happens, and she comes out of it like, hell no, I want nothing to do with this. I never want to return. Get me out of here, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it's interesting. I will say I'm kind of seeing why they might have gotten George R. R. Martin to blurb it, because I feel like there's some degree of similarity in terms of all of these different political players with different agendas. And there are a few moments that feel a little bit older and more adult. I'm curious to see where the next book in the series would go, if we're gonna get a time jump and see these characters older, because right now they're still relatively young. They're like, 20 or something, early 20s, if anything. I'm curious to see what it would look like for Cassandra Clare to write characters that are like 30s or something, main characters whose perspective we're in this world. I think that would be cool. So I am really enjoying it, honestly, more than I expected to. I didn't expect to be as into it as I am, and I'm not sure why that is. So as much as I do think the first third of the book has writing issues, I'm enjoying it. So I am gonna go listen to some more of the audiobook. I may check back in before I finish. I may just wait till I actually finish the book and then come back in. So you're getting kind of like my thoughts and recaps and reactions. Hopefully this comes together into like a cohesive vlog. Okay, I'm not done with it yet, but there are a few things I want to talk about because a lot's been happening. One is there was this weird scene where Kel saw the king yelling at his old astrologer and then throwing him to a crocodile to be eaten. And then the, head of his military, who is his former sword catcher, turns and sees him and tells him that one day it'll be his responsibility to, when he doesn't want to go and find the next sword catcher, even though it'll kill a part of him. So there's definitely something weird going on, I think maybe magically, because the whole thing about becoming king and then a god taking over the protection, does it also come with madness later on? I don't know. I have questions about it. It's kind of interesting. And then Lynn, had accepted a gift from Connor of this old kind of magic book that's forbidden, that she's not supposed to have access to. And somebody knew that it happened and called one of their community leaders. They found all her books and took them away. And like, she's kind of in trouble basically for being interested in exploring, learning more things that are forbidden to her as a woman, but also, I don't know. The rules are a little bit complicated, but she is super frustrated because she was able to use the stone to heal her friend, not entirely heal her, but make her better in a way that she hadn't been able to before. I feel like there are gonna be repercussions for what she's doing though. You know, she knows that using one of these stones is considered forbidden to her people, but she's still doing it because she cares less about that and more about whether she can help people, but she doesn't really know what cost this magic is necessarily taking, and I feel like it's not going to be good. Another thing that I had thought before a little bit, but now seems to be more heavily confirmed, is the Ashkari very much seem Jewish coded. In fact, like, the person who they consider their real prince has the title Ben Judah, and their entire origin story of, you know, this woman who was a queen kind of becoming their goddess and saying like, oh, well, you'll wander, but one day I'll return and bring you back, which I don't know like how different kinds of Jewish people might feel about the depiction. I have no idea what Cassandra Clare's background is. I don't know if she's Jewish or what. I actually think I remember reading that she grew up or spent some time in the Middle East in her bio. I'm gonna look this up because I'm curious. I know she keeps some stuff private, but okay, so she was born in Iran, and she's 50. Wow, okay. I suspect she's I mean, she might be Jewish. Listed as some of her relatives are a grandfather named Max Rosenberg, which is definitely a Jewish last name. So I don't know. This is interesting. She was born to American parents in Tehran, Iran. She is Jewish. Okay, so Claire is Jewish and has described her family as not religious. So I guess that answers that question. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, this definitely does feel like the Ashkari are intended to be coded as Jewish, and there's a lot of complicated political and relational dynamics for their group. And so I'm curious how much of it is her drawing on actual Jewish history and culture in developing them. Yeah, just interesting. Those are my updates. I'm gonna keep reading. Oh my god, y'all. So there's one chapter left in the book. There's a lot happening. I don't know what to tell. I don't even know what to say about it. But also there's hints that like part of becoming king means the king and queen have a marriage to the sea so that the sea protects them. So is it a sea god? And he threw the body to the sea and that alligator ate it. So I don't know what that means. It's probably not good though. Listen. Also, Kel had to go to a party pretending to be Connor because Connor had disappeared and everyone wanted to talk to him privately. And there's secrets. We don't know what the secrets are, but clearly everybody has secrets. I don't know. It's very intriguing. So final chapter of the book. It's a long chapter. I feel like everything's about to go to hell right before like a cliffhanger ending. I think that's what we're gonna get. Because the ending of the penultimate chapter is this dinner party where Colin comes in and wants to switch places with Kel. They're about to switch places and then they start hearing screams and realize that the supposed entertainment is actually people with knives and or swords and stuff, and they're under attack. So I don't know. See what's gonna happen. All right. And it is finished. And I was right. We did end on a big cliffhanger. Shocker. I'm sure you're all surprised. Okay, so wow, a lot happened in the last chapter. In the attack, a lot of people died, including the 12-year-old, so that's a whole thing. Kel has decided he is going to work with the Ragpicker King to try to get information to protect Colin, and Lynn lied and said at the ceremony that she is, in fact, the goddess reborn. Is she actually lying? Is she really lying? I don't know. She thinks she's lying. Part of me is curious if she really actually is. So I don't know. That's it. That's the thing. That's the end of the book. What did I think about it? I really liked it. Despite a not so great start, I think I would give this like a 4.5 star. I had a very good time, and I do think that it is a step up from what we've gotten in the Shadowhunter books. I felt like the pacing was pretty good for this kind of an adult fantasy novel. My biggest issue, which I know I've said before and I'll say it again, is about the first third of the book getting too much world building in places, some awkward sort of info dumpy stuff happening. But I feel like once we got past that first third, it was just purely characters, action, what's happening, and I really enjoyed it. So is Swordcatcher worth a try? I would say yeah. I think be a little bit patient with it in the first section of the book. There are some silly things like, yes, okay, we're going to a brothel, so we know that it's not YA. But that aside, I think this is genuinely a really interesting fantasy novel with a lot of political intrigue, twists and turns, some romantic subplots, and I am very invested and will definitely be picking up the next book in the series whenever it comes out. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully this was interesting and comes together into a cohesive vlog. I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts. And if you've read Swordcatcher, which if you've watched the whole spoilery vlog, I'm guessing a lot of you probably have. If you haven't read it, do you plan to read it now that you've seen the vlog? I don't know. But for people who have read it, what did you think? Did you like it? Did you think it was better? Did you think it was significantly different from other things you've seen from her in the past? I don't know. Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.